When I was 14 years old, I remember receiving a phone call from my family, hearing that my little baby cousin had just been rushed to the emergency room. He is a special needs kid, so he has been in and out of the hospital ever since he was born. However, me and my family knew that deep down this is going to be a little bit different. I remember I remember the call being about how he was in liver failure and he was just put on the organ donor list, and we were going to be waiting to hear if he was getting a transplant. Waiting by the phone in anticipation was absolutely horrendous for my family, but a lesson for me. And although the circumstances were not the best, it was good that I was exposed to the donor list because I learned quite a bit from it. And according to DonateLife.net in 2020, there are about 8,000 people who pass away from waiting for an organ transplant within a year. Today I wanted to convince you all to become an organ donor yourself, and I will do that by first talking about the organ donor list in general. Second, I will be discussing the qualifications to be an organ donor, and then third, I will be discussing the impact of being an organ donor. First, I wanted to talk about the donor list because I feel like that is a very important part to this whole process, because the transplant list is constantly growing and evolving rapidly. And according to transplantliving.org, there are about 100,000 people. There are 100,000 men, women, and children who are waiting for an organ transplant. And I also found out from this website that every 10 minutes there is 2 people added to the list. And because this list is constantly rapidly changing and evolving and more people are being added to it, that is why they are in dire need of organ donors. And it also relieves the stress from doctors, because doctors are constantly put in the tight position to decide on who is in a more critical condition and who will be getting an organ or who will not be getting an organ. Another important thing about this list is that there are people on the list who are only waiting for non-essential organs. There are people who are waiting for kidneys and tissue and other things that could be donated without there having to be a death. There are people who are starting to take up living donors. Living donors are starting to become popularized, and because this is happening, there are people who are no longer on the list for things such as kidneys and tissue. There are a lot of people who die waiting for an organ, and according to organdonor.gov, 22 people pass away in a day just waiting for an organ. And that can be fixed just by increasing the amount of organ donors that there are. Now that I had just talked about the organ donor list, I will now be talking about the qualifications to be an organ donor. A lot of people who want to be an organ donor sometimes feel that they can't be an organ donor because there are restrictions. However, there are very few restrictions when wanting to apply to be an organ donor. And according to a 2020 study in transplant.org, even with an illness, you are still able to donate because during a time of death, a doctor is still required to inspect organs before a transplant surgery. A lot of people also feel like they can't be an organ donor because they have illnesses such as asthma or diabetes, and that is actually not the case at all. According to American Transplant Foundation.org in 2018, the age range to be an organ donor goes from newborn to a senior citizen. So age is also not a determining factor to be an organ donor. There are, however, 2 main illnesses that will restrict you from becoming an organ donor. The first being cancer, and the second being a systemic infection. Cancer is obviously a very dangerous illness to pass on to a recipient. That's why cancer and systemic infections are determining factors to be an organ donor. Now that I have just talked about the limitations to be an organ donor, now I will be talking about the impact when becoming an organ donor. The main reason why I am very pro being an organ donor is because being an organ donor can help people like my family and other families, and because I have such a personal connection to it, I've seen firsthand how the whole system works, and how it can be a very stressful situation and a very intense process. There we go. Another thing that people tend to forget when becoming an organ donor is that they can help multiple people at once. When you are an organ donor and worst comes to worst, someone were to pass away and their organs were harvested quickly enough, they could benefit up to 10 people or more. And one important critical thing to know is being an organ donor, you must discuss it beforehand, because when there is a sticky situation and someone is in a rush and they need to harvest the organs, if they are not an organ donor, a doctor is not allowed to harvest the organs. And because organs are very delicate, if they are not harvested immediately, they could die off along with the body, and then they just become useless to everybody. Another reason why people should definitely become an organ donor is because when they are helping these families, they're giving each individual another chance. And so that is why I wanted to convince you all to become an organ donor today. I first discussed the organ donor list. I second discussed the qualifications to be an organ donor. And third, I discussed the limitations. And the reason that I am able to go and see my cousin every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, and travel to go see them every holiday is because of the organ donors out there in the world. And because of the situation, my license also reads organ donor. Thank you.